Welcome to Third Floor Views, a production of Chesapeake Family Life, where we talk about health, education, and living with kids. I'm your host, Janet Jefferson. Here with us today is Octavia Brown. She is a licensed social worker and mental health therapist, the co-founder of Annapolis Coalition of Black Progressives, and mother of three. Thank you for being here with us today, Octavia.
Thank you so much for having me.
Today, we are discussing raising Black children. To our viewers, please feel free to submit your questions or comments in the comment section, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Let's get started. So first off, what do you want to share about your experience as a mother?
So I would say it is the happiest, most rewarding role that I could have, but it is also the scariest role that I could have. From the time that I had my first child in 2004, and then down to my third child, every birth brought such, it's just a feeling you can't, describe. And I think all moms, we look down at our children and we think about all that we want to provide those children, the opportunities we want to give those children. But for Black and Brown moms, we also think about how we can keep those children protected, and the very stark realization that there is just some things that we don't have a lot of control over, and that we have to prepare our children to not only understand that and learn how to live in this society as a Black and Brown person, but as a parent, we have to always and continually prepare ourselves for if something were to happen to these precious beings that you love with every fiber in your body. So I would say it's like the best and scariest thing ever.
So what do you want other people to know about being a Black mother? What are things that come to your mind that you just want to share with everyone today?
So for my non-people of color, what is important to know is that being a Black mother, it comes with a lot of obstacles, and it comes with a lot of perils that most non-people of color do not ever think about. So for an example, there in everything that you do as a parent, race is always, and racial relations is always a part of it. So I can even talk about, having to decide where I should live, the quality of school that my children should go to, and still being like, I made the wrong decision. And for an example, like growing up, I went to schools in Annapolis, Maryland, that were typically predominantly African American, and those schools the culture of those schools looked much different. The teachers were, they did their best, but they didn't quite understand how to interact with, Black and Brown children. They didn't quite understand the perils that Black and Brown children parents have, and that Black and Brown children have in general. And I can even describe to you, how there would be like tape down the hallways, and the children were expected to wear a uniform, and children were expected to walk down this, straight line. And sometimes, even as an adult, when I walk through those schools and inner city schools where there are a lack of resources and a lack of funding, it almost reminds me of a prison. Like, you're preparing these children for prison. And I don't know if you ever heard about the school to prison pipeline. That is a very real thing. And so being a mother, it was like, okay, where do I send my children to school? And in Anne Arundel County, you either send them to a predominantly Black and Brown school, or you send them to a predominantly white school. And so my thought process was, of course, okay, I need them to have the best, academics possible. I need them to have the most resources. So I'm going to move them into a predominantly white neighborhood and and allow them to go to a predominantly white school. This, of course, backfired because my children were socialized racially to hate themselves, and so they would come home, and my daughter, who is darker skinned, would be like, I hate my skin, I wish that I was lighter. My son, who was lighter complected, would tell me how he would try to pass as white. He would try to tell his friends that he were white. I remember finding videos in his phone with his, as he was a teenager, before I inevitably pulled them out to homeschool them. And there was a video of one of his friends making fun of him, calling him a slave, and so as a Black parent, I want people to understand that we feel like we're constantly in a lose-lose situation. It's like so while other parents probably don't think about stuff like that, we have to think about it every single day. We have to prepare our children in a much different way. So like my children, especially my Black sons, it is important for them to understand that you can't afford to make mistakes. So while other teenagers can go and do teenage adolescent things, that might cost you your life, and so they are also very much more protected. And so, and the question is, as a parent, I had to always ask myself, am I doing the right thing? If I hide them from the realities of this world, when they begin to be an adult and it hits them, it could traumatize them for the rest of their lives. But if I'm real with them, then I'm telling them that the world thinks that you're nothing, and we have to basically deal with that. We have to deal with that. And so it is an extra layer of responsibility and an extra layer of complication that I'm going to say that probably all parents that are not of color, would never have to deal with. And I just want, people to understand that it is I remember, and I know this is like, kind of personal, but from the time that I had my children, I would have these nightmares that somebody would take them from me, or I made a mistake and forgot and left them somewhere, and now they're unprotected. And in my dreams, that I would always be rushing back and praying and hoping that my children were okay. Certain things my husband will tell you, and I'm going to be very transparent here. When we are in front of a group of white people, I don't say certain things. So I am concerned about, well, we can't yell at the kids because they might think that we're abusing them, and they might call protective services and take our children, or something like that. It wasn't any better when I worked for Child Protective Services, and I saw that there was a huge overrepresentation of Black and brown children that are in foster care, and sometimes for reasons they didn't need to be in foster care, so there's this just extra layer of being a Black parent that sometimes, if we're not careful, we can get so caught up in parenting out of fear that we forget to parent and out of love, and just and not out of a survival mentality, and just embrace that, these are my children, I love them, and I'm enjoying motherhood. So motherhood for a Black parent is like a win-lose situation, kind of like, you love being a parent, but you spend from the time that I had children, I had spent my life in so much anxiety, and anxiousness and nervousness than before I had children. My life is definitely altered in a different way.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like your mental load is way beyond what someone who is not in a Black and brown community, and that there are things that you're constantly thinking about that are running through your head all of the time. And there's not a lot of space to have fun, and to really find joy. Do you think that's different, being a Black mother opposed to a Black father? And how do you think, like thinking about yourself compared to your husband, do you think that you have more mental load than he does?
I think that,
or just different?
Yeah, I think it's different. And I think that women, we mothers have a different role than a father, right? And so, the father, and we always make jokes, like, because in my household, my kids know I'm an overthinker. So, when they come to me and they're like, can I do X, Y, and Z? I'm like, oh no, I gotta do this. Well, I don't know about that, and what if this happens? They know if I go to daddy can be like, whatever, you know what I'm saying? So, I'm definitely probably more protective, in certain areas, and I'm thinking about things, but in other situations, my husband is completely alert. So for an example, in being that they went to a predominantly white school, the conversation, and again, I'm being completely real and vulnerable with you right now. The conversation came up of, what if, our teenage, what if our sons, because my husband, he's the father of my youngest son, but the stepfather of my oldest two children. But what happens if he wants to date outside of his race? And it's scary. And it's like, we think about the times that, if something happened, or if there was a conflict in a relationship, or the many times that, Black or brown men were accused of rape, and things like that. And to have to sit and try to decipher how to tell your kid, like, what do we tell our kid? Do we tell them, not to date, outside of their race because it's dangerous? Or do we, but if we do that, then that's not, and so these are conversations that
it's too much.
A lot. These are conversations that my husband and I have to navigate. My husband is definitely, he's very hands-on with explaining to our children, this is how you interact, with people of an opposite race, and most importantly, white people. However, he's really great at teaching them to stand up for themselves, and to fight for social justice. And so, our family is big on, fighting against racism, but we all know in our household that just doing that could cost all of us our lives. And so there are some times where I've organized maybe, something that affects, a white person's business because of overt racism, or I have stood up against a politician or someone in power, and then the conversation happens at home where it's like, we got to keep the doors locked. This is what happens. And if I pass away, like when we have a system in place for if something happened to me and my husband, way before that we should even ever think about passing away. But because we are advocates and active fighters against, the system of racism, we know that it could potentially cost us our lives. And do we teach our children to do the same? And if we do teach them, we know that we're putting them right in the limelight, and we're right in the line of fire as well. And so, but my husband is definitely, he's definitely hands-on with educating them about how to fight the system appropriately, what to do, what not to do, how to interact with the police. My son is 15, and he'll be 15 in 9 months in August. And most children are excited to go and get their permit. My son, after this another most recent murder of an innocent Black man by the police, he said, I don't want a license, Mom. Like, it's unsafe for me, and that's heartbreaking. But, I get it. I understand. I don't want him to have it either. If I could just drive him around for the rest of my life, I could. So it's always a thing where we're like, are we doing the right thing? And that is a constant conversation between me and my husband and my oldest two, their father, so we all work together. And so we're constantly, battling, how do we handle this? How do we, come about, dealing with this? How do we advise our children? Are we doing it the right way? Is this going to cause them to, be in harm's way, and et cetera? So yeah, it's definitely a lot.
What are you most proud of as a Black mother?
So I am most proud. I can sit and rant and rave about my children all day. But I was a teenage parent. I got pregnant at 16. I had my son by 17. My daughter, I had her by 18. I didn't have my youngest until much later, but I was a very young parent, trying to raise Black and brown children in this society. And so I fought really hard, to make sure that they had every opportunity afforded to them, the best way that I could. And like I said before, I think I failed, on multiple areas, even though I had the best intentions. But I said to them, from the time that they were babies, I just want you to be better than me. Like that's the only, I just want you to be better than me. And I can sit here and say that, they're not only better than I was at that age, but my son wants to be a lawyer. My daughter is a little social justice fighter in her own way. She is a strong advocate for mental health and the use of service animals. She wants to be a veterinarian. And sometimes I'm trying not to get emotional. I'm so emotional. But when I look at that hope in their eyes and knowing that, I always say, no matter what, you can do and be anything that you want to be. You can do anything. And no matter how many obstacles, no matter how many, hindrances are in your way, you can do and be whatever you want to be. And when I look at them and I know that they were so much better, in a better place than I was at their age, and they have these dreams that I just never thought about. Like when I sit in front of you today as a licensed social worker, understand that was not supposed to be my path. I mean, my family, I fuss at my dad all the time because now I got all these student loans, but he was like, college, like I was so off the hook, that I never thought that I would be in college. But being able to see my kids live, just live so boldly and really examine, their life choices, that just and how it might affect them. It makes me so proud. Like I can't even begin to tell you how proud I am of them.
That's awesome. It's really heartwarming. And I think as mothers everywhere, it's something that we all deeply connect to is seeing the beauty in our children and always hoping for better for them, wanting better.
Absolutely.
What's your deepest fear for your children as a mother?
I can tell you that with the swiftness, because I think about it every day. I think about death. I think about incarceration, and I think about them not knowing their worth, and that is the scariest thing. Trying to teach them to value themselves in this society and in this country when the whole world is telling them that you're nothing. For them to believe that about themselves is my worst. I think that's even scarier to me than death or incarceration or anything like that. It's important to me that they know who they are and that they know their worth and they value themselves, which is a feat within itself, because the world does not value them the way that I value them or that I want them to value themselves. So that is probably my worst fear, I would say.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
Especially as a mother, because I feel like at the end of the day, it's our job as mothers, as parents, to help raise kids in our eyes how we want them to be and how they see themselves.
Yeah.
So it puts a lot on the role of motherhood.
Mm-hmm. It does. It absolutely.
What are you optimistic about?
I am optimistic now about, I feel like I am so blessed and honored to be living at this time of history where I have walked side by side with hundreds of non-people of color who have declared that they are standing in solidarity of Black lives. I have, and I'm trying not to get emotional. I have, when I was a little girl, my grandmother, let me tell you a little bit go back a little bit. I am biracial. My mother is white. My father is Black. My mother side of the family comes from Pasadena, Maryland. Pasadena is probably one of the most overt, racist, and dangerous areas in the entire county. And my family, when my mother and my father was dating, they were absolutely against my mother dating a Black and brown person, to the point where my mom would share stories of when she was pregnant with me, that her grandfather, which would be my great grandfather, had told her, if that baby is Black, either you go or the baby goes. Like, basically that and that baby was me. And so growing up, I mean, I ended up, being with my grandfather on my father's side, but my mother told me that, her plan, of course, was to put me up for adoption. She could not bring a Black baby home, right? And so when she went to, through labor and she had me, she said that my grandfather took one look at me, my great grandfather, the same one that said, "You better not bring no Black babies in here." And he said that it doesn't matter what your parents do, it's not your fault. And I was accepted immediately. And the importance of that was that I was born to make change, right? Like I was born to make change. So I ended up, my mom didn't end up raising me. I ended up being raised by my father's side of the family. And my father's side of the family, they gave me an identity, right? And being biracial is even tougher because you're as being biracial, the white community does not accept you at all. Like it's not like they don't look at you and say, "Hey, you're white." No, they see Black, right? But then you're not also fully accepted, by the Black community as well. And so a lot of biracial people have a lot of identity issues and things like that. But my family, I had such a support with my family that that they gave me an identity. They from the time that I was a little girl, my grandparents said, the world sees you as Black. And so I'm going to give you an identity. And this is what you need to know about our people. And she sat me down probably at the young age of like 5 or 6 and showed me roots. And right. And she's passed away now, but she always joked because she was like, that was the worst decision I made because I was so angry. Like I was so angry. But it was at that moment that I knew my life's work was dedicated to eliminating racism, empowering Black and brown people, and helping to try to unify, the world, right? And so as I look back at that time and all the work that I have done from, when I did go to school, of course, my focus was social work, but I've always, I did Africana studies, everything, all of my academic was focused on building up the Black community and dismantling racism, right? And so when I say that I have waited my whole life for this moment, I have done the work for so long and really like I remember there was some points in my journey that I would just be so discouraged and be like, this is never going to change. Like nothing is ever going to happen. I'm tired of doing this work. I'm burnt out. This is never going to happen. And then to see a new decade, right? So 2020 starts a whole period of newness, right? And a lot of people will look at it like, oh my gosh, 2020 is the worst year ever. But I see it as the best year ever for change, right? And so, you have the coronavirus that happened. And so you got people forced to spend time with their family and their loved ones, and things like that. And then because of the coronavirus, we had all the stimulus checks. And that's for people, I think about people who would not have normally had that income, who have now been able to get cars fixed or get stuff done because they had that extra stimulus check. And then I think about George Floyd, who passed away at the hands of racism, because that's what it is. He passed away at the hands of racism, but his death was not in vain. And it almost makes him a martyr for a movement that I never, ever thought that I would see. And so the most moving part of this movement, right, is when they had the march in Pasadena. And I cried because that was personal for me, because I had family in Pasadena who never fully accepted me because of the color of my skin, right? And so when I marched in Pasadena alongside of hundreds and hundreds of allies, it was probably the most emotional moment that I could have ever had. And I am so, for the first time, so optimistic at where our country can head if we keep this movement at the forefront of our lives, that we don't fall back asleep and ignore that these things are happening. If we continue to be angry about racism and fight this together side by side, I am so optimistic about what the lives of my grandchildren might look like, or my great grandchildren will look like. And I am, I'm so sorry that our ancestors did not get to experience, that optimism, but I am so grateful that my children do, and that my grandchildren will, and that my great grandchildren will. And I'm so hopeful for change.
What have you noticed in the Annapolis community? So we've talked a little bit about Pasadena, but thinking about your experience as a Black mother, what has that been like in the Annapolis community? And you talked a little bit about the struggles with school and trying to find the school that was the best fit for your children, to the point of feeling like that there's not an option, and pulling them out, and homeschooling. Have things changed? How do you feel overall about the Annapolis community and what it's providing your children?
So Annapolis, Maryland has a special history. I am from Annapolis, Maryland. I am the seventh generation. My children make the eighth generation of Browns to live in Annapolis, Maryland. We're from the parole area, so I know Annapolis and the history of Annapolis very well. And we have a special history because right downtown Annapolis, where the Alex Haley Stadium is, was a slave port where slaves arrived on boats, in that exact area, right here in our city. And so the difference between Pasadena, Maryland and Annapolis, Maryland is one clear thing. Pasadena is overt racism, and Annapolis is more hidden. Okay. And so in order for you to be able to see the racism, you have to really pay attention to the structures of Annapolis and the systems of Annapolis. So when you look at the school systems and what they look like, how they differ from schools that are predominantly white, you'll see racism. When you look at how the communities are segregated, and they are, when I say that there are literally two Annapolises, you have white Annapolis and you have Black Annapolis, and they literally do not intersect. Okay. And so when you look at the communities in Annapolis, Maryland, they have historically been uninhabitable. We're having issues right now with, the mold issues, but these are not new issues. These have historically been happening in Annapolis, Maryland for years. When there was a separate, where there was segregation that was in place in Annapolis, Maryland, you had thriving Black communities, thriving Black businesses. Post-integration, there are none, or very, very little. You see, the effects of what living in a very systemic racist city looks like. But when you look at the lack of opportunities for Black and brown people in this city, when you look in the school systems and you see the very disproportionate number of Black teachers, that are in the school system, when you see how the students are handled, how they are disciplined, you will see that racism is very alive and thriving here in Annapolis, Maryland, but it's more under the radar, like you don't really see it, because when people think of Annapolis, all they think about is the water and the boats and the yachts and, all of the things that we as Black and brown people, that those things are not what we think about when we think about Annapolis. And so I have, with all of that being said, tell you that with this movement, there has been an influx of more overt racist, individuals. And so we look at things like the Eastport Annapolis Forum, or Neighborhood Forum, or Annapolis Moms, where, because these systemic issues were never challenged or addressed, they remain quiet in the background, right? But when these issues present themselves, and there comes a time where you have to either stand in solidarity or you're on the other side, you see so many people who are on the other side and are now like angry and speaking out their truths, right? But the thing that is most, optimistic to me is that there are way more allies and individuals who stood in solidarity than there were individuals who said, I'm not standing in solidarity and I'm not for Black lives, and so I have such hope and optimism for my city. We've been talking to, my co-leaders in the city, friends of us who have grown up in the city, and we all feel that the environment is different. There's a shift, in the environment. And we are so optimistic to see a new side of Annapolis that is truly one Annapolis and not so divided and so discriminatory. We are just really hopeful to see a new side of Annapolis.
So last question.
Yes.
What's next? What's next for you? Because I feel it too. We're at this, I'm fingers crossed, this moment of change. But as you said, we can't let it go. We can't let it slip through our fingers. We have so much work to do. And that includes everybody. But for you and your family as a Black mother, what's next?
So what's next for us is a lot. So we know that we are taking full advantage of the opportunity to be able to allow our voices to be heard and to do what we do as social workers do best. We advocate. We try to implement and develop and push policies that are progressive. We try to eliminate policies that are discriminatory. I just passed my test for my clinical license. So it's next week. Thank you. And sometime next week, I will be an officially licensed, an officially licensed clinical social worker. Sorry, that's a tongue twister. And I absolutely am starting the phases of opening up a practice here in Annapolis that will offer not only regular mental health services, but specifically offer mental health services and racial trauma and healing from racial trauma. So it's like, now it's time to heal, right? Mm-hmm. Now that we're addressing, because you can't begin the process of change until you actually acknowledge that there's a problem,
Absolutely.
So now we have finally acknowledged, Annapolis have finally acknowledged, the country has finally acknowledged that racism is a serious public health crisis, right? It is a serious public health issue. So now that we've actually gotten the acknowledgement, now it's time to heal. It's time to heal. It's time to put that work in. It's time to revamp policies. It's time to hold elected officials accountable. It's time to get new and progressive elected officials in office. It's time to do the work. It's time to do the work now. We can actually get the work done. And I feel that we actually have a space and an openness to get it done. So that's what's next for the Browns.
That's a lot. But I can't wait. And I can't wait for the whole Annapolis community to really pitch in and do the work because there's a lot of work to be done.
It is.
Thank you so much, Octavia Brown, for being here with us today and sharing some of your thoughts about what it's like to be a Black mother in Annapolis, what it's like raising Black children, and how 2020 is maybe, hopefully, a really good year. Thank you to all of our viewers and listeners as well. Make sure you visit ChesapeakeFamily.com for up-to-date information on health, home, and living for today's Maryland parent. This episode will be archived on ChesapeakeFamily.com in video and podcast format. I'm Janet Jefferson with Chesapeake Family Life and Third Floor Views. Thanks so much.